Wow.
What's up?
I just bought and financed a car through Carvana in minutes.
You? The person who agonized 4 weeks over whether to paint your walls eggshell or off-white bought and financed a car in minutes?
They made it easy. Transparent terms, customizable down and monthly. Didn't even have to do any paperwork.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Hey, have you checked out that spreadsheet I sent you for our dinner options?
Finance your car with Carvana and experience total control. Financing subject to credit approval.
Yeah, sure thing.
Hey, you sold that car yet?
Yeah, sold it to Carvana.
Oh, I thought you were selling to that guy.
The guy who wanted to pay me in foreign currency, no interest, over 36 months? Yeah, no. Carvana gave me an offer in minutes, picked it up, and paid me on the spot. It was so convenient.
Just like that.
Yeah?
No hassle.
None.
That is super convenient.
Sell your car to Carvana and swap hassle for convenience. Pickup fees may apply.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack, and Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge, who was otherwise engaged last week, Stuart, which obviously on the upside meant we could bring everyone our interview with Simon Raymond, which I thought had a lot of interesting revelations and opinions in it, but it does also mean we have a lot of news to catch up on this week, including Macca's thoughts on AI, the latest report from the Music Venue Trust, and Spotify's new deal with Universal Records. But first of all, talking about where you were last week, it was the Music Ally Conference. Did anything come out of that which you think we should know about?
Yeah, it was good. So it's our annual conference, and it's kind of just people from all over the world come along and talk about trends. It's all about trends and big picture stuff. And we had Apple Music speak this time, which is kind of a rarity. Like, they speak at their own conferences and their own press launches, but not that often. And they came to talk about streaming fraud, which kind of is something we've talked about quite regularly, haven't we? About people criminals trying to make. And their big announcement was that less than 1% of Apple Music streams are fraudulent. And they reckon it was actually close to 0.3%. And they kind of talked about how they've done it, which is a mixture of kind of creating tools to help labels and distributors work out if there's any dodginess going on with their music, but also punishment. Like, they'll kind of fine them. I think they called it a financial adjustment, which is quite a nice euphemism for fine. So that was quite big news because, like, remember a few months ago we talked about Spotify coming out, and do you remember that $10 million case where someone was alleged of stealing lots of money from this? And Spotify said very little of that was us. And now Apple is saying very little fraud is us too. So it's kind of pointing everyone to, well, if it's not those two services, where are all the criminals doing their streaming fraud? Yeah. So we might see some of the other big streaming services now coming out and having to sort of talk about this too. Otherwise, they'll get seen as kind of the problems. So that was good. But the other thing I pick out, we had this guy who I know, he's called Darren Hemmings. He runs an agency that works with kind of labels and artists and brands to do marketing. And he gave he gave one of those talks where everyone in the room is laughing because it's very funny, but it's also very serious. He began by sort of saying, Space Karen has bought Twitter and it's now full of bigoted, truth-hating weirdos, and Meta's going the same way, and AI-generated slop is about to ruin everything even more, which kind of gets everyone to sit up and pay attention. Yeah. But he and other people were talking about this idea of social media changing. So do you remember when Twitter first came out and Instagram got big? And it was all this thing of, as an artist, you could reach your fans now and you could post and they could see your posts. And this is all the brave new world. And the sense I got from a few speakers was it's changing now. And that these services, TikTok, Instagram, they're starting to see themselves as entertainment services, not social networks. Right. So rather than seeing stuff from the people you follow or your friends, you're increasingly seeing a lot more stuff that they think you'll like by random things. And so you're seeing less of the stuff that your favorite artists post or your friends post. And there was a lot of talk in the room about that, about what does this mean for musicians who, used to see social media as a really good place to connect with their fans. And there were people talking about, okay, now it's about bringing your fans to other places that you kind of have more control of. So a kind of resurgence in mailing lists and messaging groups and even new stuff like Discord servers. But there was a lot of talk around the idea of, okay, social media is becoming less and less a place where if you post something, the people who follow you will see it. So I thought that was interesting, that people are starting to figure out what to do about that. And it is all about, right, let's get our fans together. So that was the other thing. It was more a trend. But it was good, yeah. It was generally quite positive. There's there was a lot of talk about AI and what that means, but again, more positive. People saying, actually, all these things are quite disruptive, but we're going to roll up our sleeves and get on with making the best of it. So yeah, it was good.
We'll come back to this week's AI story in a bit. You mentioned Spotify briefly there. This was big news a few days ago. Spotify, and this came a bit out of the blue, I thought, but Spotify have signed a new deal with Universal Records.
Yeah, so I remember the days when like the signing of a new deal with a big major label was you'd have months leading up to it of like leaks and speculation, people saying,
Yes.
"Oh, this label's crossed with Spotify." But yeah, this has been quite quiet. So yeah, so it's basically the licensing deal between Universal Music Group and its publishing arm with Spotify. So it means that basically, like all of UMG's music and the songwriter songs, they'll stay on Spotify and get paid. And it's kind of like the announcement, they usually stand to these announcements. They don't really tell you how much money it is or what the terms are, obviously, because that's all confidential. So they kind of say things like, we're going to work together on new things and initiatives and we're going to benefit artists. And it's normally it's quite, it's quite kind of there's not much in the press release of the juicy details. But the thing this time was it includes a direct publishing deal, including in the US, which again sounds quite boring if you don't follow publishing. But the reason it's important is in the US, like Spotify, we've talked about this, decided last year that Spotify was now a bundle, which meant that it could pay lower royalties out to publishers because it also had audiobooks and the rules for what royalties you pay if you're a bundle are lower. And that caused an almighty hoo-ha, which is carrying on. But the reports this week suggest that Universal Music's deal has clawed back some of the royalties that are being lost there. So by having a direct deal with Spotify, its songwriters are going to get paid some of the money they maybe wouldn't have got under the way it was doing things. And there was a good quote from the NMPA, who are the publishing body, who've been really like holding Spotify's feet to the fire over this whole issue. And they said this signals Spotify is coming back to the table after its disastrous attempt to manipulate royalty rates.
Right, yeah.
So the kind of speculation is, right, this deal with Universal is only for Universal songwriters, but it maybe signifies there's kind of some compromise going on. There's a way through this big row. But it does beg the question of, will this work for the other majors when they sign their deals with Spotify? Because they all sign at different times. Mm-hmm. And also independent publishers who'll be thinking, well, hang on a minute, how do we make sure we get some of that money back? But yeah, so it's kind of, it came out of the blue and all the analysis is focused on the publishing side and that this is going to increase the royalties for Universal songwriters and possibly signifies, a change for others too.
Right. Spotify as well this week, well, actually just the other day, also made an announcement about the money they're putting back into the music industry, claiming, in fact, that over the past year, well, in 2024, Spotify paid out $10 billion to the music industry, and they obviously wanted to make quite a fuss about this, didn't they? It felt like this was a fanfare announcement saying, "Look, we're not the bad guys. We have put back $10 billion into the music biz." That's how it struck me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, and Spotify has historically actually done this quite regularly. So it did this around the same time last year for the year before. It likes to say this number because it is the biggest payer. So it's kind of to its advantage to say how much that is, and then point at everyone else and say, look, they're not telling you how much they pay because it's less than us. So it is. But it's a big thing. And it comes actually like last week while I was in between the conference, this report came out and it was talking about how much the different services pay per stream. And it's one of those tables where Spotify is right at the bottom. Because if you're a musician, you calculate how much you got paid by Spotify, how many streams, the number is lower per stream, which is not how it pays out and so on.
Right.
But it was really cross at that report. It came out and said this report is ridiculous, I think. It was a quote.
Who, just out of interest, before you go on, who's at the top of the table then in terms of paying out royalties in this report that Spotify don't like?
Well, it's Apple Music and Amazon Music. And one of the reasons for that is they only have paying users. So there's a lot more, it's only people who are paying, and so the per stream calculator is higher, whereas Spotify has a lot of free users.
Right, okay.
Which kind of, this blog post announcing the $10 billion went into, and it said, look, our free tier is really good. And this is something they said before, but they were saying, look, our free tier persuades people to eventually become subscribers. And they also talked about their growth in places like India and Brazil and Nigeria and Mexico. Like these are the exciting new countries in the music industry, and Spotify says it's growing really well there. And and that's starting to turn into money. So it's kind of, it is a positive story. Like nothing Spotify says will ever dampen down some of the criticism of the company. Like however much money it pays out, there's always going to be that debate, and it's important debate. I don't think it should squash it.
No, well, you say that, and obviously when I first saw the story, when you forwarded us the release, and my first thought is, well, how much of that $10 billion is going to the top 3% of the music industry in terms of the popularity? Are all the big artists hoovering up this money? And this is not going to stop emerging artists saying, but we still get paid very little. It's all very well and good, you're saying. And, rightly so. Somebody's very popular, so they do receive a lot of the income. But it's very good business release, isn't it? It's a very, for them, it's a great claim to make. We are doing a good job business wise. It's not about the creative, and as you say, there's always going to be debates about whether the money's going in the right places and how Spotify will deal with artists who aren't right at the top of the commercial tree.
Yeah, I mean, and in fact, there was a bit in the blog post announcing it about that, where he talks about, and this is something that came up last year. It's an existing stat, but the guy who was writing, who's the head of music business, said more than 10,000 artists are now generating more than $100,000 of annual Spotify payouts a year, which is obviously payments to their labels and publishers, which then they take a share of. But yeah, so I mean, the other thing I thought was interesting is there's kind of this in the background, this deadline approaching for YouTube that relates to this that I was going to tell you about. So Spotify is the biggest payer to the music industry as an individual company. Like, it overtook Apple quite a few years ago. Apple used to be the biggest. But a couple of years ago, YouTube's music boss, who's a guy called Leo Cohen, who's obviously very famous music exec, he said that his intention was that YouTube would overtake Spotify as the biggest payer by 2025. And that's he set out that deadline. Like, we're going to be bigger than Spotify. And so a couple of years ago, YouTube's annual payouts were about $6 billion at a point when Spotify's were maybe $8 billion.
Right.
So now Spotify said ours are $10 billion. It's kind of drawing that line in the sand. So I'm really interested to see if YouTube comes out now and says, well, actually, ours were $9 billion last year and we're going to overtake you this year as we planned, or whether they'll be quite quiet because they're not. And that's kind of it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't matter which of them is bigger, because if they're both paying $10 billion a year, that's good. But there is that kind of fun race in the background for who is the biggest payer in the playground. But for the moment, it's Spotify, and they're kind of capitalizing on that by announcing it, I think.
Also last week, the Music Venue Trust, the charity set up to support Britain's grassroots venues, launched its latest annual report at the House of Commons. It was last Thursday evening, hosted by Alex Sobel, who's one of the MPs for Leeds and is very supportive of music in general, but particularly the live scene in this country. And it is, having tried to digest as much as I could of the report, it is, as always, extremely comprehensive. I mean, there's enough stats and stories in this report to fill a whole episode of this podcast, to be honest. But it was a good launch. I went along in the Terrace Bar at the House of Commons. Kate Nash did a short live set, which was very good. She also, between a couple of her songs, gave a very impassioned speech about just what a struggle it is for artists to make touring work financially, which is a subject we've touched on a couple of times, once just before Christmas, wasn't it? That artists are just finding it really difficult to go on the road and make some money would be brilliant, but just not lose as much money as, that some artists have become almost accustomed to. In fact, Kate Nash said that obviously she wants to put on a good show. She wants to have a whole band with her. She wants decent production. So she said, this is the way she said she goes about it is, I save up, this actually, I noted this quote down. She said, I save up a nest egg from playing festivals and then I blow it all on going on tour. And then after that, she said, and I'm Kate Nash. So if I can only hope to break even on a tour, what's it like for anyone just starting out? And as I say, it's becoming more and more apparent, isn't it? Artists struggling to go on tour. One of the other stats in the report is this, that the average length of a grassroots tour in 1994 was 22 gigs. The average length in 2024 is 11. So the length of tours at grassroots level has halved since 94, which I think is, because then the knock-on effect of this is artists are missing out on some of what they call the secondary towns. I mean, they're even missing out on some of the what's called the primary circuits. But the report points out you're getting less gigs in places like Portsmouth and Reading and Hull and Leicester and York and Wolverhampton, where these places are just becoming increasingly overlooked because musicians are cutting their losses, and that's not helping the grassroots venues in those towns who are already facing up to a litany of challenges, many of which we've mentioned before. But it's, if you can't attract artists to play, you put on less shows, your chance of, getting to the desired level of turnover to make your venue work properly, that gets harder and harder. There's loads of other stats in the report. I think you've glanced through it as well. Did anything strike you as being interesting that we should point out?
Yeah, so there was one thing that looks quite good, which was that I think the net loss of venues last year was 25, wasn't it? I think there were 810 venues at the end of the year on the circuit, and that's good because it was 120, I think, closed the previous year. So it looks like the number of venues closing, but then as the report points out, I think the number of events is down, income from ticket sales is down. I think 43% of them reported a loss last year, so they're not making money. And I actually interviewed Mark David, the CEO, which is the first time I've actually given a proper long form interview with him. He's really interesting as an interviewee, not least because he does that thing of saying, "Oh God, this is the sort of thing I get in trouble for saying," but, and as a journalist, you just go, your ears prick up and you go, right, tell me this thing. And he's not doing that to kind of spin me a line. He's doing it because he genuinely is about to say something that might get him in trouble.
Yeah.
But he said he thinks a lot of venues have been hanging on, and he called it the bubble of hope, I think, in the hope that this idea of a ticket levy on stadium arenas will happen. But he was saying basically, and it looks like that's going to happen, and that's good, and that's going to be a great thing. But he said if it doesn't happen or if it doesn't work, he reckons that between 300 and 400 grassroots venues could close, and that's like half the circuit, which made me boggle. Because I think we've that idea of losing half the circuit it seems like it should be impossible, but that's what he thinks could happen. In his speech at the House of Commons at this launch event, and he pointed out, 25 venues closed. But does anyone in this room think that 25 venues closing is a good thing? And of course, it still isn't. However many venues close, and you say, does anyone here think that losing one venue, every couple of weeks, another venue closes? Is that good? But he went on to say, he says, uncharacteristically for me, I'm not here to criticise the rest of the live music industry, because the live music industry has worked very hard on this, the idea of the £1 levy. The Live Trust, which I'm a part of, has launched. In fact, we'll come to that in a second, because there's a band who've already signed up and pledged £1 from their ticket to go to grassroots venues. But the industry is attempting now to help the grassroots from the top end down, or at least it's trying. And as he told you, we'll see if it works. I genuinely hope it does. What's coming down the line, though, and one of the reasons I think he still fears for the future is things like, and this is where he directed his ire in his speech, not at the rest of the live music industry, but now at government. And because there's the business rate relief change coming. So at the end of April, the government will reduce its business rate relief for venues from 75% down to 45%. And Mark said in his speech, that's going to cost the indie sector something like, with various other taxes that are coming, £7 million. And that's £7 million that the grassroots music circuit doesn't have. And that plays into what he was saying to you about X amount of venues might
I mean, just the fact that if you think, and this was in the report, the profit margin for a venue is just under 0.5%, tells you how much on a knife edge some of these venues are. So he turns his attention to, and there were MPs in the room. Alex Sobel was there, Sean Berry was there. People are very supportive of the Music Venue Trust. But he was saying, you've got to go away and got to keep campaigning. And it's all very, all well and good. A lot of MPs saying we really believe in the grassroots music scene, the whole ecosystem that goes with it. But he said it's about action now. Words are just not enough. Otherwise, things are going to get worse. As I say, I think there's a genuine fear that although the rate of venue closures, as you say, has slowed down, but the amount of debt being carried around by some of the surviving venues, I think, is a real worry. But, sorry, you've got your hand up.
This is what. No, well, you can, because I think the other thing he said though that I thought was really interesting. You said about him criticizing MPs. He had a very spiky message for some of the people in the music industry who haven't chipped in so far outside live. Like in our interview, he addressed Spotify and he thinks it's outrageous they gave more than 230 million euros to Barcelona Football Club, but haven't chipped into this kind of cause. Yeah. He wants Universal Music Group to chip in. So he's kind of on the, I think he is on that. Warpath is the wrong word. I think he's drumming up, really saying, look, chip in. Words aren't good enough. You need to help us with action.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
In slightly better news, though, as I say, I know I've got some skin in this game myself, but can we just mention that Lynyrd Skynyrd are the first band to commit to giving £1 from their ticket sales of their next tour to the newly formed Live Trust, which is the charitable trust set up by the trade body Live to help channel funds through to venues and artists and promoters via a £1 voluntary levy. We've already seen a handful of big artists pledging money to the Music Venue Trust, but the Skynyrd are the first to sign up to the trust plans. And I mean, I haven't had time to try and guesstimate how much that might raise from the tour. But, hopefully it'll be a little whack of money and it's a start, and hopefully other artists will follow suit, and, the money will come into the trust and it will be redistributed to organisations like the Music Venue Trust and FAC, the Featured Artists Coalition, representing the artist community. So there'll be money for bricks and mortar, money for promoters, money for artists, which hopefully will help with, partly at least, in trying to find a solution to some of the problems that Kate Nash was highlighting last week. We shall see more, I'm sure, on that to come. You got a final point?
Yeah, well, no, I forgot the other thing. The other thing Mark David said, I don't think we should speculate here because it would be irresponsible. But the other thing he said was they're preparing to do another fundraising round for their Music Venue Properties offshoot, which is the one that buys the freeholder venues. Yeah. And he said, I want to quote this, they're looking at some very significant venues. When you see them as a music fan, you're going to go fucking hell because they're some of the most famous venues in the country. And really? As much as I want to sit with you now and go, who could that be? I don't really want to do that because I think that's sort of suggesting who's in trouble and not. But that's quite exciting because I think we've seen them buy some really interesting venues around the country so far. But it seems like they're setting the bar even higher in terms of size and reputation. So that's something to watch out for later in the year, I think. And that's why they want everyone to chip in to the fundraising.
By the way, we'll do this as a quiz question if we do another Price of Music quiz. I'll just leave you with this so you can think about it before next week. Apart from Lynyrd Skynyrd, can you name 2 other bands that don't have vowels in their name? There you go.
Oh,
I
hang
think
on.
not now. Not now.
Okay.
Not now. We've got work to do.
I'm going to be distracted for the next 20 minutes.
At some point, sit down and think about it. We predicted, not unreasonably, in our first show back after Christmas, that there would be some big AI stories this year. Well, here's a couple, but starting with a big name, and this has been widely reported by news outlets, including BBC Radio. It's been in loads of the newspapers, because Sir Paul McCartney has weighed into the AI debate, saying proposed changes to copyright law could allow, quote, rip-off technology that might make it impossible for musicians and artists to make a living. Tell us more about this.
Well, this feels like, to me, the part in a movie where things are starting to look a bit dicey and someone goes, deploy a beetle. Because that's what's happened, I think. So we've had this, in the UK, we've had this debate about the government maybe planning to give AI companies more rights to kind of train on copyrighted content. And they may get the music industry, if you don't want that, you have to opt out. And the music industry is unhappy with that idea. And so, Fab Macca Thumbs Aloft, as I will always know him from my Smash Hits days. He was on the BBC, I think, wasn't he, on Laura Kuenssberg on Sunday morning. And he said, essentially his view is it's ripping off young artists and songwriters. And he kind of pointed out, which I think is the reasonable point here, if there's money being paid, someone's getting paid, if money's going somewhere, it should be going to the musicians too, who are vulnerable. And I think he warned the government, and he said, basically protect the creative thinkers and the creative artists, or you're not going to have them. Which is it's that age-old thing, isn't it, of someone who is very famous, very rich, has done very well from the old recorded music industry, is talking about, it's not about him. He's not worried about his money. He's talking on behalf of all those songwriters and musicians who are coming up now. And he gets to go on the BBC and talk on their behalf when they couldn't. So it's a good thing, I think, isn't it? And I think you've seen Bjorn from ABBA do the same thing, like that caliber musician who don't have to worry themselves personally, but they worry on behalf of the future them. I
mean, I think the more debate there is around this, with particularly, as you say, what Macca brings to this is a recognisable face that everyone knows. So people will, as you say, sit up and listen, probably more so than if it was a young, unknown artist saying, I am never going to be able to make a bean out of this because my music's been sold to an AI firm for no money, and so I get nothing. And now there's an AI bot churning out music which sounds a bit like a bad version of what I would do. But so Macca, I mean, yes, deploy the Macca. Yeah, but maybe we should just maybe the industry should just get one big name, one big voice per month, and just during the calendar year. Bono, it's your turn next.
I think this may happen because this goes back to Music How I Connect last week, and I did an interview on stage with Victoria Oakley, who is the boss of the IFPI, the global labels body, and she's a really interesting figure because she's from the world of policy. So she used to work for Google, getting politicians to do what Google wanted. I mean, that's good. And now she's at the IFPI trying to get politicians to do what the music industry wants. And she was talking about this, and she was saying, like, what we often do is we focus on the economic argument, like music industry generates this much money, this many jobs, this much export value, like it's an economic value argument. And she was pointing out that as a big tech firm, you can say, well, we'll build a factory here, or we'll build this office and create this many jobs. And it's a hard argument to win, especially if a government is thinking tech is the big new thing we need to support. And what she was saying was, what we have is music. What we have is the brilliant songwriters. And she was saying every politician has a favorite song, a song that means something to them in their life, favorite artist. And what she said was, like, we need to lean into this more and get those people talking about, if you do this, you may not have us in the future. You may not have this stuff. And she thought that was something the music industry needs to do more. So I think to what you said, I think that's probably quite a good strategy for every month. Another artist who people love coming out and saying, here are my concerns. Which, there's a lot of people bending politicians' ears, aren't there? I mean, you've probably seen this in your work at Live, but I think it is powerful when someone like Paul McCartney speaks out. And I do think we're going to see a lot more of it this year, because I think that's the music industry's secret weapon, is the people who made those songs that politicians and policymakers love, as well as us.
Just very quickly on while we're talking about AI, put some flesh on these bones. The music streaming service Deezer is saying that around 10,000 fully AI generated tracks. That's fully AI generated tracks. 10,000 AI tracks are being delivered to its platform every day already.
It's not me. Let's just make that very clear. It's not me.
Dear listeners, just in case you're new to the programme or missed it, at some point last year, I think it was around springtime, while Stuart was testing out some AI software which he had on loan, he attempted to make some music. I emphasise attempted to make some music, and he's threatening to do more of this. But it's not one of these. You haven't been flooding Deezer then with
I haven't, no.
with
Just
your
made that very
in
clear.
inverted commas music.
I have not. So 10,000 tracks a day, which is actually, so around 100,000 tracks a day are uploaded to Deezer and other streaming services. So if this figure is correct, it's like a tenth of all the new music being uploaded is wholly AI generated. So it's not like artists using an AI tool as part of their creativity. It's just people pressing it. And we haven't, and the thing that struck me is we haven't really got started yet. Like this stuff is still quite new. It's not mainstream. Like AI models can generate millions of tracks a day. So 10,000 a day is actually quite small beans in terms of what it could be done. Mm-hmm. So it's a little warning shot for the industry of going, look, this is starting now. But the context is quite interesting here. So Deezer also said most of those songs are never streamed, which I thought was interesting. And it warned that they're kind of clogging up the catalogue. Yeah. And they could be used for fraud, is the other thing it's worried about. But so the interesting thing here is Deezer announced this not just to kind of make everyone run around panicking, but it's been developing this tool to detect them.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's been working over the last year. So it's got this tool that it says can detect wholly agent music, and it's using that, and it's not going to take them down at the moment, but what it is going to do, it's going to flag them. So if you're listening to Deezer and you find yourself on a track that's AI generated, you will know it will say this is AI generated.
Okay.
But also they're going to boot them out of their recommendation system, so when their algorithm's recommending you new stuff, it won't recommend that stuff. So that's the kind of approach they're taking. They're not kicking them. But yeah, it's kind of. And there's a lot. I mean, actually, a few conferences recently, there were a few companies working on this kind of technology. Like, if we're going to do something about lots of AI music flooding streaming services, we have to be able to detect it first. And it won't be the human ear because there'll be too much. And also, it will be indistinguishable. You know, a bad AI track isn't so different from a bad human track. Mm-hmm. So you're going to need technology. You need AI, other AIs to spot the AI. So it's interesting. This is one of the first times a big streaming service has said, we're using this technology, we're going to detect it, and here's what we're going to do. And that is something that the big labels are encouraging. So Universal Music is very keen on this sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, 10,000 tracks a day, I think this is like the thin end of the wedge. Like in a year's time, it could be a lot more. And that's what everyone's thinking about what to do, what they need to do.
Just before we finish, I suppose we better bring the, I know it's sort of marginal in some ways to what we do here around music, but it is quite a big marketing tool for the music industry. So I guess we should bring the TikTok story up to date. Again, I know this has been very well reported. Some of you will have been following this anyway, but when we last left you, TikTok was about to go dark, which it did. But it's back. But this isn't the end of the story.
God, no. If only it was. No, yeah, a lot's been happening. So, I mean, Donald Trump is the new president for anyone who's been living under a rock screaming, trying not to find out. And he energetically, like, as soon as he took power, he did as many terrible things as possible on his first day. But one of the things he did was TikTok. So, yeah, I think when we left it, TikTok had a deadline of 19th of January. It had to be sold in the US or banned from app stores there. And like you say, it went dark. It was taken off the app stores and the app stopped working for about 4 hours. And then Trump said, I'll sort it out. And it came back. But what's happened? So it's a bit complicated. Trump hasn't got rid of the law that said it had to be sold or banned. But he's told his attorney general, don't enforce it for 75 days while I figure out a solution. And weirdly, Donald Trump appears to be leading negotiations. Like he keeps talking about how he's in talks with people who might want to buy TikTok. Because what he wants to do is sell it to a US company, essentially. And more than that, he said quite openly, he'd like the US government to have up to 50% of TikTok as a stake. So the US government could be the co-owner of TikTok, at least in the US.
That is dangerous.
Which is
dangerous.
And essentially, and this sounds flippant, but it's not. He kind of wants to grab TikTok like he wants to grab Greenland and the Panama Canal. You know, it's that kind of thing of, I want that thing, so I'm going to take it, and I'm the president. And there's this ever-growing list of people and companies who are rumored to be involved. So there were a few reports saying Elon Musk might be the new owner of Twitter, which, given what he's done to Twitter, is
of TikTok. Yeah, sorry,
yeah, space or Space Karen, as the guy speaking at our conference put it. Tech firm Oracle, whose billionaire boss is a big Trump backer, it's been rumored. Even, I don't know how aware you are of the work of Mr. Beast.
Oh yeah, no, because I have a young daughter. I have seen Mr. Beast in action. Yeah, you better explain Mr. Beast though for other listeners. I mean, it's not. What was the guy's name? It's not a Mr. Men character.
No.
Mr. Beast. It's not. Was it Hargreaves? It was not one of his characters. Mr. Beast is a YouTube phenomenon.
He is. So he's a guy called Jimmy Johnson, and his I don't know. I mean, he does a lot of videos where he gives away money. He does a lot of kind of big concept videos. He's done a TV show now, a kind of a game show with Amazon. But he has made so much money from YouTube. Like, he's one of the most successful person, I think, to emerge from YouTube. And now he's a businessman, he's an entrepreneur. He launches all kinds of things. He's in talks with various groups of investors to try to buy TikTok. So one guy said, "Oh yeah, Mr. Beast is part of my consortium." And then Mr. Beast's spokesperson, because he has a spokesperson, said he's actually in talks with lots of groups because they all want to have someone like that as a figurehead. Microsoft rumored this morning. So there's this weird situation where TikTok has been saved. It's still available in the US. It's still not in the app stores there, though, because this law that said it should be banned said if you are party to making it available, so Apple or Google, for example, they can be fined $5,000 per person who uses it to access TikTok, which is I kind of did the maths. It's $850 billion of potential fines for Apple and Google. And for some reason, like Trump has said, don't worry, we won't punish you for that 75 days. You won't get in trouble. And for some reason, they don't seem to trust his word. So they haven't put it back up, which means on a serious level that TikTok can't update its app in the US, which is kind of a security risk, but also can't add new features, and new people can't download it. So it's back, but it's not fully back. And there's this huge uncertainty over who Trump is going to try and make it be sold to and what their intentions are for it.
And then I guess the knock-on effect of that is what it will be in the future. I mean, if you're talking at your conference about how these services will work and will function, how they will work for musicians in the future, what will TikTok be like? And will it continue to be a place where a 30-second clip of a track can help boost your career, within a matter of 48 hours almost? So it's will it still be part of the musical landscape, or will it not? We wait and see. That'll have to do it for this week. Thank you very much as ever for listening. If you have enjoyed the show, I always say this, but it does help if you can subscribe to us in your podcast app, and even better, give us a review and a rating. That would be lovely. Or if you have some loose change, you can support the show through our Patreon page, where you can become a Price of Music fan or super fan for as little as £2 a month. You'll find details at patreon.com/theprice of music. And finally, any thoughts on any of the stories in this week's episode, or if you have a question which you'd like answered on the show, something about the money flowing through the music industry, or any tips you're after from us that we might be able to help you out with, or find someone else who can, drop us a line, thepriceofmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, thank you very much. Take care of yourselves. Cheerio.